Hello, it's Jack Pepper here, composer, author, and your guide for these 15-minute coffee break conversations. It's Classeek 15, and today we're talking about programming and repertoire with the pianist Jeneba Kanneh-Mason. We'll touch on diversity in repertoire, dealing with concert promoters and record labels, and how to build your creative confidence. But we begin with her latest album, out December 2025. It's called Jane Austen's Piano, and we began with Jeneba introducing the concept, the world, and the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, so this is titled Jane Austen's Piano, and I think it first started because I have such a love for Jane Austen's books, and then I discovered that she was also an amateur pianist as well, and then we discovered all of the her family collection of pieces that her and her sister played and things like that. And then it just created this really nice idea of like going into Jane Austen's world with the music kind of colouring the books and the characters.
And there's a really wonderful range of repertoire here, familiar and not so familiar, you know, from Haydn to Kramer, the kind of music that she might have played in her own lifetime. What are the considerations for you when you're choosing what pieces to include on an album like this? What are the kind of considerations? What's going through your mind about the music choices?
There's kind of the initial, when you listen to it and you want that initial, like, oh, this is really exciting, I can't wait to play this. Or if you're like, oh, actually, this just feels like I'm going to get bored of it in like a week. So you have to think about that. But you can't always predict how the piece is going to develop with you. But for example, like the Handel suites, I was like, especially the suite in B flat, the minuet, I was like, this is just so beautiful and really, really stunning. And the harmonies are so gorgeous. And then the lesser known pieces, the fact that Kramer is mentioned in the books by name, and then I went and listened to some of his repertoire, and then I listened to a few of the etudes, and I was like, this one in A minor, it feels really romantic, but also, you know, it definitely feels like music that would have been played around her time as well.
And how does it develop you as a pianist then, when you're encountering repertoire that might be familiar or indeed maybe new? How has it changed you and your approach to the piano?
I think every piece offers a new insight into your playing, and I think just the process of learning is a great way to develop your pianistic skills when you're introduced to a brand new score and you've got to think, how am I going to interpret this? How am I going to make something of it? And then you have to kind of see how you relate to it as well. So you have to come up with your own kind of idea of like how it feels, the characters in the music and things like that.
And are you a quick learner? Do you absorb music quite easily, or do you have to live with it for a long time?
It really depends. And also, if I say I'm a fast learner, it sounds really arrogant. So I don't know if I should say that. I think the notes come to me quite quickly, but actually emotionally, sometimes that takes a bit more time for me. Just because, like, obviously, like the kind of logistics of the piano is like I've been playing the piano for a very long time, but then there's always something new with a new piece of music. And I'm like, I don't know if I found the emotion yet, and I don't know if I can relate to this piece yet. That takes a bit more time.
It's interesting. You used a word a moment ago. You said the character in the piece, not of the piece, but the sort of characters, the people. Do you see them as kind of like a novel? Do you see a story unfolding when you play a piece of music?
Yes, sometimes I do, yeah.
And is that you creating a story for yourself just to help you access the emotion that you spoke of a minute ago?
Yeah, because I mean, I love reading. And so I think sometimes if I'm in a phase where I'm not reading as much or I'm not watching as many films, I find that I can't access the emotions as easily. I think I need to be absorbing lots of different mediums of art in order to make sense of the music. But I mean, like, I'm not going to say like specific characters because it always sounds so silly when I say it out loud. But when I am performing, I like to have, like, especially on those pieces that I find a bit harder to access, I like to have a little story kind of running through.
And a Jane Austen story, or just a Jeneba original?
Sometimes a Jeneba original, yeah. But with these, I guess I can definitely base it off of like the stories that I've read, because I've read the novels of Jane Austen, and these pieces definitely represent those characters in the books.
It's very interesting. I used to have this sort of weird thing where I'd feel guilty if I was not doing something directly musical. So if I was away from the piano, I felt like, therefore, I must be becoming a worse pianist. I find it so interesting what you're sort of finding the connections between different disciplines and what reading teaches you about music. Are you a better pianist for your love of literature?
Definitely, yes. It's being able to empathize with, you know, like, that's why I love reading, because I'm empathizing with other characters, and I'm like, it just takes me out of myself and my own head and my own ego. And then I often find that it really does color my piano playing. I think just the broader your life is, the easier it is to then go to these pieces which explore like the extremes of human emotion. And if you haven't, not that you have to have experienced it yourself, but if you've experienced it in a book, it's really, then you can channel that into the music.
Interesting. So it's a sort of fast track to human experience in a way,
Yes.
because you could be a young artist, but you can access a lifetime of wisdom, I suppose, and experience and emotion from those novels. Yeah. Is it something you come across with a lot of other young artists? Is there a love of literature, a love of reading that you find with other young musicians, or are you more unique for your Jane Austen obsession?
No, I don't think I'm unique. I have loads of friends who love films and books, and also my sister is a writer, so like I just feel like I have a direct line to literature. And I did English at school, and yeah, I really loved that subject. But yeah, I think that most kind of, if you're really obsessed with one form of art, it often is like an avenue to get obsessed with another. And that can be anything. It doesn't have to be books.
But there is a practical consideration in that you're touring the world and making recordings and so on. Time is tight, I'm imagining, in your household. How do you find the time to read? Are you literally reading in the dressing room before a concert, in the corridors of a concert hall? Where do you find the time to read?
It's when I'm traveling. I have hours and hours on flights and trains, so like there's not really much else to do but read or listen to a podcast or watch a film. That's like my time when I can just be with a book.
Well, it is a book that you've very helpfully and very kindly contributed to. Music We Might Have Played, this new piano anthology, which I helped curate. And the idea is it's shining a spotlight on composers and repertoire, like your Jane Austen album, perhaps repertoire that might not be so familiar, potentially, and some neglected composers there. And in the foreword that you wrote, you spoke about your childhood and your love of classical music, but you used the word outsider in the way that classical music was framed growing up. Can you expand on that from a repertoire point of view? What made you feel like an outsider?
Well, from a repertoire point of view, I mean, when I was younger, I was playing very, very like classic piano music. And then when I got older, I started to explore more underrepresented composers. And I think growing up, sometimes there was kind of an expectation of what a classical pianist would look like, and the kind of media that I would absorb. It would be, lots of white musicians in the circles that I would move in as well. But what I was really fortunate for is that I had all of my siblings. So, in most of the circles that I moved in, they would be there. And so I didn't always feel like an outsider. And I think definitely now there is a lot of change happening as well, which is really, really positive. But yeah, all these composers I'm playing right now, like Florence Price and Margaret Barnes, they would have felt like outsiders as well in the field of classical music. And so I find it really important to represent their music and perform their music.
And you mentioned Florence Price in particular in that foreword as the composer who really opened your eyes and ears to a new kind of music. What is it about Florence Price, the way she writes, that makes it so energizing and inspiring?
She's not trying to conform to anything. Like, she's really unapologetically herself. And the first piece I discovered from her was the concerto, because the Chineke Orchestra asked me to play that concerto with them. And I was like, wow, this piece is just so amazing and so different to anything I've done. And it has so many different elements. Like, I can hear a bit of this, I can hear a bit of that. There's lots of jazz. But then at the same time, she's using all of these different elements and therefore creating her own unique sound. And so all the other music that I've played from her now is like, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is so Florence Price. And when I play it to audiences, they love it straight away. And yeah, I think her music is very distinctive, but also very, very easy to listen to in a positive way.
And you touch on the exciting trends in programming, that people like Florence Price are being programmed. I work on the Gramophone season preview every year, and it's interesting because I've done it for about 5-6 years, and I can trace certain names. And maybe 5 years ago, you might see them in 1 or 2 ensembles, and now you can see them being regularly programmed. So that's a very exciting thing. What, from your perspective as a performer, as an artist, what are the biggest changes in terms of trends in concert hall programming, the way ensembles think about repertoire, or a record label like Sony? What are the trends and the changes that you've seen in your career?
There's an active desire to include music that people would have not necessarily listened to, and music from women, music from Black composers. There is an active choice that's being made. And I think that's necessary because it can't just be like, it will just happen naturally because, I think you have to actively be like, we're going to include that. And then it becomes standard repertoire. And I think now I'm starting to see that there are lots of composers like Coleridge Taylor, and they're becoming core repertoire. And that's because of these active choices that are being made. And it's also because we're having the discussions now, and we weren't having those discussions before. That they're coming up like now in interviews. And so people are just much more aware of it as well. That's the change I'm seeing.
Do you think there's greater open-mindedness, greater confidence, maybe? Because it's interesting, often the media, we're talking about challenges facing the music scene and music education. And is it actually, though, in a way more confident and more bold now, the classical world, do you think?
More confident from whose perspective?
From a programming perspective, and the way that we speak about classical music and what we feature in a concert or an album. Do you think we're more confident now in that presentation?
Yeah, I guess it does take a kind of, form of confidence, because if you're, let's say you're a concert programmer and you want to include Florence Price in the program, and you might be like, well, not everyone's going to know this piece. Is it going to sell? But people are still programming those pieces. And I think what's helping is that they're programming them alongside more of the popular works as well, which is quite clever, I think, which is also what I did in my album. And not only does it mean, okay, you've got something that hooks people and then they will then discover these new composers along with that, but you're also saying these composers are just as important because they're alongside Chopin and Beethoven, and etc. But yeah, I guess there is more of a confidence for people to be like, yeah, I'm going to program this, and who cares what you think?
And have you grown more confident when it comes to programming and knowing, who you are as an artist? Is that something that's taken time for you to establish? How have you changed? How has your confidence maybe changed over the years in that?
But I feel like I've moved with the world at the same time. I don't think, because I discovered Florence Price kind of at the same time as everyone else. So I don't think I was necessarily like the first champion. I definitely wasn't the person who championed Florence Price. I was asked to play her music, and then I've been discovering it with everyone else. And I think so it doesn't even feel like a confidence for me. It feels like very natural to include her music in my programs and on my album. And I think as a person, I've grown more confident because there is this desire to represent in the industry. And so I feel much more like there's a place for people like me.
And how much do you individually control on something like a new album with Sony?
Yeah.
Is it you bring the whole set list and you say, hello, Sony, this is what I want to do? Who decides what in this world?
It's definitely a discussion. Like, I come with ideas, and sometimes it's like, no, that will not work. And it has to be because I don't have any kind of experience of the business side of things as well. So I might, and also with the way that I program, it's often like, I really, really like this piece, but then I haven't always thought through like the story and how we're going to sell it, etc., etc. And I'm learning on the job of like, there's so much more to it than just pieces that you love. There has to be a narrative, and there has to be something that hooks people as well.
And is that very important for, if there's another young artist listening who maybe doesn't have a Sony classical or management maybe, but they're listening and they're trying to, make headway in the concert space. What would be your sort of advice to them in terms of navigating the different things you must keep in mind when you're constructing a program? Should they also be thinking about the business, the selling, the tickets? That's something that every artist needs to keep in mind too.
I don't think so. I don't think they should be worrying too much about that, because like, I think their job as a musician, you can't worry about all of that. That's why you have the other people to guide you, and like your team, etc. I think being as authentic to yourself as possible, like trust what feels right and what doesn't feel right, and going with that. And yeah, I think people love to see, when they watch someone on stage, they love to see them being themselves, because then you feel like you're like with them.
Well, we can hear your love of literature as well as your love of music in this new album. It's called Jane Austen's Piano, and at the new piano anthology with your foreword is Music We Might Have Played. Jeneba Kanneh-Mason, thank you.
Thank you.
And you can catch every Classeek 15 chat with me, Jack Pepper, on all the usual podcast platforms, as well as online at classeek.com. You can look out for chats on artist management, how to handle a media interview like this one, and life on the road. Thanks so much for your company, but it's bye for now.